Buddhist philosophy and quantum physics. For that, we have Professor A.K. Mukhopadhyay from AIMS, New Delhi as the chair, and Dr. Joseph Ivan from EPCMS, Bangalore, Venerable Geshe Tinsit Hamjula from Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, Dharamsala, Professor C.C. Roy from NIAS, Bangalore, and Ms. Parisha Jijina from MS University, Baroda. May I request our speakers to take their respective seats. And now may I request our chair, Dr. A.K. Mukhopadhyay, to proceed with the session.
Good morning, everyone. We are already running late, 15 minutes, and this session is lengthy. Unlike other sessions, there are 4 speakers. Most of the session has 3 speakers, but this session has 4 speakers. So I request the speakers to stick to the time allotted, and we must finish at 1:45, even if we have to stop the discussion here, because next post-lunch sessions are also very lengthy. So this session is mainly on the consciousness, and you know this is the era of the consciousness revolution. In 1987, Roger Sperry wrote a lengthy paper, 34 pages, in Brain-Mind Bulletin, the structure and significance of consciousness revolution. And he sent that article to me as a signed RWS. So that since 1987, now it is 2018. So you understand that so many years have passed and the revolution is going on. Now we have a speaker who speak on consciousness from the neuroscience perspective, Buddhist perspective, and Professor Roy will speak on the quantum mechanics perspective. I consider myself as a student of consciousness, and I report to consciousness for my doubt clearance. Therefore, I have a few questions. Just Professor Roy, that by doing quantum mechanics, can we reach consciousness? By doing neuroscience, can we reach consciousness? By following mind regulations, can we reach consciousness? And how does the West think of it? Thank you. May I call the first speaker, Joseph Thomas. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Physiology at East Point College of Medical Sciences and Research Center, Bangalore, and is also an adjunct faculty in the School of Neurosciences and Engineering at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. He is also a certified clinical hypnotherapist and is presently pursuing a master's degree in philosophy. Dr. Joseph Thomas.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank sincerely the Tibet House and Professor C.C. Roy for having organized this 2-day conference. The topic I'll be talking about is on the current status of consciousness research from the perspective of neuroscience. Now, this is a very vast area to talk about, and I can't do that in 20 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll try to summarize very briefly some of the most salient developments that have happened in the last 2 or 3 decades. So consciousness has been a subject of study by philosophers for almost 1,000 years or more. Definitely in the Eastern tradition has gone even further back in time. And for the last 100 years, psychologists have made it their subject of study. And it's only within the last 10 or 15 or 20 years at most that neuroscientists and physicists have made a move in. In 1990, Francis Crick and Christoph Koch, they made this remark in one of the landmark papers: most work in cognitive neuroscience makes no reference to consciousness. Things have changed considerably in the last 2 decades. It's today a very rich, multidisciplinary subject, with contributions coming from researchers as varied as psychologists, philosophers, neuroscientists, physicists, and even mathematicians. The reason could be, it could be partly blamed on Isaac Newton because of the success of all his theories, from gravity to optics. It gave mankind the confidence that he can predict things. For example, the tides and the position of planets and comets. So perhaps that same confidence can be shared for explaining the basis of consciousness on physical principles. Now, in the middle of the 20th century, a rapid number of developments happened in the sciences, namely the foundation of cybernetics by Norbert Wiener, information theory by Shannon, the proposal of the Church-Turing thesis, and the invention of programmable computers. Now, all of these developments helped in the foundation of a new discipline called cognitive science. And cognitive science is nothing more than a study of how thoughts happen, how human thoughts are ordered. And the central paradigm of cognitive science is that man is a programmable machine. By that I mean that the brain is a hardware and the mind is a software. So this paradigm is also referred to as computational neuroscience, and it was enforced by a neuroscientist by the name David Marr. He published a book called Vision, where he describes what a computational system exactly encompasses. And that one book actually helped fortify a new subdiscipline of neuroscience. It's called computational neuroscience. Now, what is a computational system? Any system can be said to be computational if it has a goal, a final objective that it seeks to achieve. And that goal should be achieved through a stepwise sequence of steps with an overall plan that we call an algorithm. And each of those micro steps that are taken in the direction of achieving that goal, we call it a representation. And the material resources that are employed to achieve the goal is called a mechanism. So I'll give you a simple example of a computational system in physics. A spring mass system is a typical example of a computational system. A spring mass system is nothing more than a spring which is fixed on one end and a mass is loaded on the other end. Now, the spring mass system, it can be used to add up the weights of different loads. So if you put a load W1, you get an extension X1. If you put a load W2, you get an extension X2. Now, if you combine both those loads, W1 and W2, you get a combined extension X1 plus X2. So the displacement or the extension of the spring represents the weight of the mass that's applied. In other words, the spring mass system is actually doing a computation, and that computation is that simple arithmetic operation of addition. But the thing is, the spring mass system doesn't really know that it's doing addition. It isn't consciously aware of it. It doesn't say, okay, I'm going to add x1 plus x2 multiplied by k and get w1 plus w2. It doesn't do that. So why should the brain be any exception to that? Just because the brain may be a computational system like a spring mass system, it doesn't really help us draw any closer to what exactly consciousness is. So computational paradigm, as far as studying consciousness is concerned, is really a failure. It will not help. In the middle of the 1990s, a philosopher of science by the name David Chalmers came along, and he published a series of articles which climaxed the interest of the scientific community to study consciousness in a more serious manner. And why his publications aroused so much interest is because he correctly identified two sets of problems or two sets of challenges that a neuroscientist who wants to study consciousness would face. One set of problems is called the hard problem of consciousness. Now, this is the toughest problem. It's perhaps even intractable. We may never be able to solve it. And that problem is that the brain is constantly going through a whole lot of different physical states. And each physical state is associated with a mental state. And we believe that the physical state is responsible for the mental state. but we don't know how. What is that connection between them? What makes hot coffee hot? What makes the pinch of a needle, or what does it make it painful? Definitely changes happen in the brain, but just because there's a lot of chemical and biological changes happening in the brain, and even physical electrical changes, why should those changes manifest in the form of an internal feeling? So that's what the hard problem of consciousness is. The other problems are called the easy problem of consciousness. Now, don't get me wrong, though the term is easy, it's no way easy. This is the bread and butter of all psychologists and neuroscientists trying to understand how the human mind works. By easy, I mean it's tractable. It's at least solvable. We can use the scientific method to analyze it and break it down to its simplest components. For example, what is the difference between sleep and wakefulness? That's something that we can analyze, something that we can figure out. The same way, how does the brain actually discriminate between objects? Say that you're given a basket full of apples, oranges, and bananas. How are you able to identify an apple as an apple and it's different from a banana and an orange, and how are you able to segregate it? These are some of the easy problems of consciousness, in the sense that it's easy to at least apply the scientific method to understand. Now, regardless of whether your intention is to study the hard problem or the easy problems, the ultimate aim of all consciousness studies is the same. It's to find a link, a connection between third-person objective data and first-person subjective data. By third-person objective data, I mean the numbers that you get in as data form, either from your fMRI studies or from EEG studies or whatever instrument you use, and to correlate that with the conscious experience of the human guinea pig that's used to do the study. In other words, it's just another effort to link events that are happening inside of the brain with conscious experience, or the contents of consciousness. Now, a good place to start is trying to define what consciousness is. So, sadly, there is no consensus in the scientific community on what consciousness is. It's very sad, in spite of the fact that we have a huge discipline that's in its formation stage, in its formative stages. But then again, does it really matter? There is no definition for electricity. We don't know what it is. There is no definition for matter. We don't know what that is either. Neither can we define what space or time is. These are all primitives. They're the most fundamental building blocks of the universe. We can't define them on anything simpler than them. Perhaps consciousness belongs to that particular category, where you cannot define it in terms of anything simpler than what it is. It's just there in the universe. It's just one of those things which cannot be defined. But nonetheless, we need something to go on. I mean, science cannot go on without something to work with. So here's a rough working definition that can be found in almost any textbook of psychology. Consciousness is an awareness of one's thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, and as well as awareness of things that are happening outside your body. So in other words, it's an awareness of the self and awareness of the world outside of you. An ability to distinguish between yourself and the other. That's what consciousness can be roughly said to be. Now, the question is, why do we have such a thing? Why do we have consciousness? Interesting enough, we don't know that either. We don't have an answer to that, but we have plenty of theories. So, Thomas Huxley, he put forward his theory that perhaps consciousness is nothing more than a side effect, just a byproduct of neural activity in the brain. It has no purpose. It just appears like it has purpose. It's just that the brain is working. And one of the byproducts of that working mechanism is the emergence of consciousness. That school of thought is otherwise known as epiphenomenalism. And a good example of that would be, a motor car manufacturer. A motor car manufacturer manufactures motor cars. And one of the side effects of using a motor car is it produces noise. It produces a rumbling noise. But no motor car manufacturer manufactures a motor engine with the intention of producing noise. The intention is to move from point A to point B. Noise is just a side effect. So perhaps that could be what consciousness is. It could be just a side effect of activity in the brain. Another theory is that perhaps consciousness, not only is it just a side effect, perhaps it's just a pure accidental structural phenomenon. That is, it's just a pure result of the architecture of the brain itself, the way the brain is wired. Take, for instance, the retina of the eye. In everyone's retina, you have one point which does not receive light or process light. That light point is called the blind spot. It doesn't contain any rods or cones. Every other part of the retina has rods or cones, and it's capable of processing visual information. Now, why would the retina have this one particular spot? Or why couldn't that one tiny place be filled with rods and cones if every other part could be filled? Well, that's just the engineering design of the retina. That's just the way it is. That's the way it is structured. So perhaps consciousness is also something like that. It's just the way the brain is structured. It's supposed to end up having this phenomenon of consciousness. Now, both those reasons are certainly not satisfactory. A third reason comes from evolution. The psychologist William James, he says that perhaps since we're all products of evolution, at least we believe we are, by means of natural selection, perhaps consciousness confers on us some kind of advantage, some kind of survival advantage which makes life easier for us. That's easily understandable if you think of an animal that lives in the desert, and if its survival depends on conserving as much energy as possible. You wouldn't want that animal to waste its energy searching for water when at a distance when that isn't water really, it's a mirage. So consciousness helps in distinguishing between what is real from what is apparent. So this is just another theory why we have consciousness. This is one of the most hilarious things about the way science is done. Though we don't know what consciousness is or why we have it, we have plenty of theoretical models explaining how consciousness works. Now, each of these models is not an exhaustive list. There are other models. Each of these models have their own strengths and weaknesses. The most recent entries are the quantum theories of consciousness. I won't go into any of these details because each one would take a 1 hour session. Now, coming to the different approaches. How does a neuroscientist approach the study of consciousness? Well, there are three methods. One is the direct approach, the other is the indirect approach, and the third one is the combined direct and indirect approach. What is the direct approach? It's always known as the subjective approach or the phenomenological approach. An example of it is the Necker cube. You can see here that there's a cube drawn on the very top. And if you take a look at this cube, if you look long enough and just blink your eyes, you will notice that the cube suddenly changes its orientation. You may either blink your eyes or you may change the angle of your view of your head. And you'll see that it changes its orientation. Either it takes a left orientation, what you see below, or a right orientation. In other words, your perception of the same stimulus, the cube, seems to change just like that, spontaneously, without any kind of effort. It just happens. It's called the flickering of perception. Now, how does this happen? We're still not sure how it happens. But what's important is that the way we know it happens is by asking the subject, did the cube flip or not? Is it facing the left or is it facing the right side? There's no other way to access that kind of information. So this is an example of a direct approach where you depend on verbal reporting of the subject. The other approach is the indirect approach. The usual experiment that's done is something called a forced choice task, where we give the subject a task that involves him to choose any of two options. And he's supposed to choose one, and he's supposed to reject the other. Meanwhile, we can study how much time it takes for him to come to that decision. At the same time, we can study the electrical activity that's going on in his brain. Now, this is a study done in 2014 where two monkeys were trained to turn their eyes. It's called a saccade, that is the movement of the eyes. It was trained his eyes to turn towards a picture of a human rather than a picture of a chair. And every time the monkey did that, a part of the brain, you can see in red, I hope you can see it, yeah, the one in red, that's the inferior temporal cortex, that lights up. So that's an example of an indirect approach. Now coming to the most, the jewel in the crown as far as consciousness studies is concerned, it's called the binding problem. Now what is the binding problem? If we can solve the binding problem, we would have solved the hard problem of consciousness. The binding problem is all about how we experience the world in a unified manner. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll illustrate it with an example. Over here, you see a picture of an apple. Now, you may think that you're seeing a single object that's red in color, and it has the shine and shape of an apple. But the thing is, the brain is doing something incredibly complicated as you gaze at it. As you gaze at it, its features, its properties are dissected piece by piece, and it's being processed in different parts of the brain. For example, its size, its color, its shape, its orientation, its contour. Every one of these features of the apple gets processed in different realms of the brain. And that process, you can see it here. Here's an illustration of how it works. The back of the brain is highlighted here, and that's the it's called the occipital cortex. And you can see the information goes from V1 all the way to V5, and from there it goes to the front of the brain and to the top of the brain. These are two different pathways. One pathway helps the brain say, okay, this is what the object is, and this pathway says where the object is in space. So the splitting of the sensory information can be likened to a child given a toy by his parent. That is, when he's given the toy, he looks at it, and the first thing he does is he breaks it apart. He takes the wheels off, he takes the doors off, and that can be compared to what the brain is doing when it sees an object in the external environment. And that process is called segregation. The next process is it combines all of that information once again into one single clump, and that's how we experience it as a single object, an apple. We don't experience it as a series of colors or contours or shapes. We see it as a single object, and that's called the combination problem. So when we say the binding problem, we're actually referring to two problems: the problem of segregation and the problem of combination. Now, segregation, now you can see here there's a blue square and a yellow circle. When the brain looks at the blue square, it's seeing two things. It's seeing the shape as a square, and it's seeing a color as blue. When it looks at the circle, it's also seeing two more things. It's seeing shape as a circle and color yellow. Now, the thing is, the segregation problem is all about how does the brain do this? How does it split the features of a stimulus in the environment into its component parts and maintain it all the way through the brain? Why is it important it should maintain it? Well, imagine if it didn't maintain it. Instead of seeing a blue square and a yellow circle, you may end up seeing a yellow square and a blue circle. All right. So that's the combination problem. All right. The next thing is the quantitative assessment of consciousness. Now, everything in science is number-based. Say that, okay, I know the temperature, the ambient temperature of this room, let's say it's 20 degrees Celsius. Or if I say, okay, today is the 2nd of December, 2018. I feel a sense of confidence, I know what I'm talking about. It's the same thing in science. The moment you put a number to something, immediately you gain respect for it and you trust it. It's the same thing with consciousness. Definitions and words, we can't trust. But numbers, well, maybe we can trust it better. So for the last 10 years, neuroscientists have been trying to figure out ways to actually measure consciousness. It's called the quantitative assessment of consciousness. And they've come up with at least 5 different parameters. The latest one was last year. It's the Lempo Complexity Index. It's the same algorithm that's used to make the GIF pictures. It's quite complicated. These are formulas with equations and numbers to be inserted. The bispectral index is very interesting. That's an index used to actually measure the depth of anesthesia during surgery. Now, the tools used in consciousness studies. There are around 6 tools over here. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'll just skip over. So fMRIs, these are the most popular pet tools of neuroscientists. They use it to study hemodynamic changes. That is, if a person is looking at an apple, let's say, what part of the brain works the most when it looks at that object? So those parts of the brain light up because there's more blood flow to those regions. And that's what an fMRI tries to keep track record of. Same thing with PET. It also tries to look at which parts of the brain are the most active, most physiologically energetic. They pick up as much of glucose as possible. EEG, this is one of the most favorite, and it's the oldest tool, and which is still in use today. It's trying to pick up all the voltage fluctuations that happen in the brain. And magnetoencephalogram, this is a recent addition, where we try to plot the magnetic fields, very delicate magnetic fields generated by the individual neurons. Deep brain electrical stimulation. Here, this is not used as a tool for research, but it is used as a tool for therapy, particularly in Parkinson's disease, where they actually electrocute, or they send an electrical current to certain specific regions in the brain, like the thalamus, and they see that there is relief from symptoms of Parkinsonism. It also has been used to actually revive people from a comatose state. So it's transcranial magnetic stimulation. Now in the medical field, because I'm a doctor, I can tell you one thing, the medical field, we have no time, nor do we have patience for philosophy, nor psychological battle. For us, what's important is getting the diagnosis correct and avoiding a misdiagnosis, because that's critical to our job. It's especially important to neurologists and anesthesiologists. These are the various disorders that we try to understand in consciousness as far as medicine is concerned. And two particular states of consciousness, persistent vegetative state and chronic coma. These are the two states which are very difficult to diagnose. There is a chance of a misdiagnosis, and misdiagnosis can be problematic. So for those two conditions, it's important that we have a good quantitative parameter to help distinguish between them. Now coming to the chunk of all research that's done in neuroscience today, it's called neural correlates of consciousness. Now you can see in this picture, the man is looking at a visual scene of a dog, a man taking a dog for a walk, and you can see on the other side that the brain shows a certain amount of electrical activity. And that electrical activity is supposed to represent what's happening outside. So we call that a neural correlate of consciousness. That is, a man sees a dog in the exterior, and somehow inside his brain somewhere, there's a picture of a dog that's represented in the form of firing of neurons. So there are two kinds of neural correlates of consciousness. There's content-specific and non-content-specific. I'll just give you an example of content-specific NCC. If you were to look at a person's face, there's one particular part of the brain that fires much more than any other part of the brain. It's called the fusiform face area. You can see the picture here in the red glow in the back of the brain. It's not on the back actually, it's somewhere towards the side. It's in the inferior temporal cortex. So that part of the brain is known to be devoted to nothing other than facial recognition. Okay, so that's an example of a neural correlate of the consciousness of face. Now there are problems with the NCC approach as well. The problems are this: just because you know which part of the brain is most active during a particular activity does not imply that you understand why the person is experiencing the conscious experience that he's experiencing. Yeah. Oh. Okay. All right. The future challenges. Well, one is that we have to develop better markers to actually distinguish between vegetative and comatose state. It would be a great dream come true if we can actually create artificially consciousness in a machine, in a robot. And lastly, to integrate the mind-body problem, which is actually a problem in philosophy, into the main body of science itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph, for a very crisp and giving this summary of the whole consciousness research within this short 20 minutes. We have covered almost everything in such a way that really it is fascinating presentation. Now I call Professor Roy. He does not need an introduction. So they have not given me the introduction of Professor Roy here. So I am not introducing him, but he will be using from quantum physics to consciousness research.
Yeah, okay. It's already afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. And as basically trained as a quantum physicist, so the question comes whether there is any scope of consciousness research within the framework of quantum theory. And it has two aspects. One is whether we need to include the role of psyche or mind or consciousness in formulation of the quantum theory. And another aspect is that as a physicist, we like to understand psyche, mind or consciousness in terms of the activities of the brain. So the question comes whether quantum theory can be applied in understanding functioning of the brain. So my plan of the talk, why this issue, and then historical developments, and quantum theory and functioning of the brain, and possible arena of research. Okay, so from classical and quantum physics, I mean, we have heard also many lectures. But what happened for this? It got, yeah. In classical physics, really people did not think of including consciousness in the formulation like Newtonian paradigm. But since the very inception of quantum theory, many people tried to understand the role of the observer in observing a particular quantity, whether psyche or mind plays a great role in understanding the interaction between observer and the observed system. I mean, it starts with the concept of choice and quantum reality. The freedom of experimentation presupposed in classical physics is of course retained and correspond to the free choice of experimental arrangement for which mathematical structure of quantum mechanical formalism offers the appropriate latitude. What is meant by this? Say, if you look at the double slit experiment, I mean, if you pass photon, electrons, or neutron through a double slit, then there will be interference pattern under certain conditions, and the microscopic quantities like electrons, protons, or photons, they behave like particle or wave. I mean, say, or particle or wave. Under certain conditions, if you arrange particular arrangements, then experimental arrangement, then you have particle aspect. But if you devise another kind of arrangement, it gives rise to wave. So people say that it depends on the choice of the experimenter, choice of the observer. So some people said that how do you include the term choice in formulation of the quantum theory, or other words, how do you include the psyche or mind in formulation of the quantum theory? Let's start with very famous mathematician von Neumann, John von Neumann, the greatest mathematician 20th century. So he studied quantum theory, and he wrote his book on Foundations of Quantum Theory in 1932. And he started with the concept that if you observe something, say if you observe apple, then a stimulus is coming and falling into the retina, then it passes through axons coming to central nervous systems, and at a certain stage we say, it's an apple. So he told ultimately, even the flip of the coin is dictated by what the brain observes or the central nervous system makes it. So since von Neumann's propositions, the whole neurobiological field is started in a new directions, whether the functioning of the brain can be included in the formalism of quantum theory, or to understand the measurement problem in quantum theory. Then came Bohm's approach. David Bohm, he was also a great physicist. Bohm specifically, he specified that human choice enter into the dynamics, but neither specifies the causal origin of the choices. The question thus arises, what determine the choices? And Bohm's formulation of quantum theory postulates, in effect, the existence of old-fashioned world of classical physical theory. Because in his formulation, he formulated starting with a deterministic equation, and then he was using a potential or quantum potential to understand the tenets of quantum theory. Then Roger Penrose, famous mathematician, and I think many people will know, he tried to formulate it in terms of the model that consciousness plays a role in collapse of the wave function in the brain. And subsequently, Penrose and Hammerhoff, anesthesists from Arizona, they formulated a theory where they said that in the microtubules, the space-time becomes curved, like curved space in formulation of general theory of relativity by Einstein, and that curvature gives rise to the reduction of the wave packet. So, even there is a superposed state, you can get only one of the states. So, reduction happens because of the curvature of the space-time produced by microtubules. So, that is called OR model. And then came Carl Twibram, that my friend, mentor, and great brain researcher. He, along with Jibu and Yashu, they tried to formulate the quantum theory in such a way that they can include the sum functioning of the brain. Then came Umezawa, a quantum physicist. He tried to understand the memory of the brain function using a kind of quantum field theoretic approach. Quantum field theory is much more generalization of quantum theory along with relativity theory. So, Riccardi and Umezawa, and subsequently Giuseppe Vitiello, one of my friends, they tried to understand the memory of the brain, which is very much essential for understanding consciousness or sight or mind in terms of the quantum field theory. This is historical development I am telling. Then came, in the meantime, physicist cum neuroscientist McCullough. He, in his famous essay, Why the Mind is in the Head, he writes, the term mind I mean ideas and purpose. By the term body I mean stuff and processes. So stuff and processes are familiar with every physicist as mass and energy in space and time. But ideas and purpose, he keeps only in the realm of discourse and will not postulate them for the phenomena he observes. And again, he is continuing, like when he was talking about theoretical physics and neurophysiology. What you observe is nothing but kind of order or invariance in the flux of events or type of regularity in the objects in the outside world. Suppose you are driving a car and another car is coming towards you. So, you need to know that how far distance the car is, which direction it is coming, whether it will collide or not. So, we have a kind of mechanism in the brain called invariance. We can say the distance is such that, the direction is such that we can avoid it. So, in a modern brain research, invariance is one of the very important issues. And McCullough raised another important issue. Let us now compel our physicist to account for himself as a part of the world. He must stick to his own rules and show in terms of the mass, energy, space and time, and how it comes about that it creates theoretical physics. He must then become a neurophysiologist. That is happened to me. But in doing so, he will be compelled to answer whether theoretical physics is something which he can discuss in terms of the neurophysiology, and that is happened to me again. And to answer no is to remain a physical undefined, and the answer yes is to become a metaphysician, so I am told. And the main problem, one of the challenging problems in modern brain research is representation and reality. Like the Plato's famous, in his book Republic, this is called the prisoners in the cave. So the prisoners, they are standing, they are compelled to stand towards the wall, and there is a light behind them. So there will be shadows will be falling on the wall. So what is the reality? Is the shadow is the reality, or something else. This is called prisoner scale. So representation of the reality is one of the main tasks in modern brain research. Okay. Now, let me raise the following questions. If we try to understand the brain and how the real world reality is represented in the brain, for that people are trying to use quantum theory like Penrose, Hameroff, Henry Stapp, and many E.P. Wigner, or Pauli, the famous Nobel laureate physicist. But the problem is whether quantum theory can explain, or first thing, whether is it possible to include the psyche or consciousness or mind in quantum formalism? Answer is no. Nobody is able to show that. Some people try to use adding nonlinearity, but that does not solve the problem. Second question, whether we can understand functioning of the brain so that we can understand consciousness, psyche or functioning of the mind using quantum theory. So what is the problem? Problem is the following. If you want to use quantum theory, quantum field theory like Mezawa, or Hilbert space formalism by Pribram, Jibu and Yashu, then you need to understand the neuronal architecture of the brain. So what is the problem? Neuronal architecture means, can we think of a manifold of neurons which has a kind of certain mathematical properties, like it's differentiable, or we can use kind of geometric structure like Hilbert space or fields, etc. Because if you want to use quantum field theory, to define quantum field theory, you need very structured geometrics. So you need to understand whether neuronal space or space containing the neurons, billions of neurons, that has property which gives rise to smooth geometric structure. The final answer is, up till now, no. What is the problem? Because if you look the neuronal states, the functional states of the neurons, they are never orthogonal. So if they are not orthogonal, Wiesel and Hubel won Nobel Prize, it is their work long before, in the 60s, that neuronal functional states are not orthogonal. If it is not orthogonal, then how do you think or construct a space like Hilbert space or Minkowskian structure? So this is a problem, that the manifold or the geometry containing billions of neurons containing non-orthogonal vectors. So if it contains non-orthogonal vectors, how do you think a space like Hilbert space? How do you think a space like four-dimensional Minkowskian space to support quantum field theory? So the problem comes, what is the space-time in brain or the space-time containing billions of neurons? This is the problem. Neuroscientists are studying this from mid of 80s. Neuroscientists like Rudolf Linus is the father of modern neuroscience. Linus, Paleonich, and subsequently I did, my mentor Linus. So we did try to understand what is the space-time containing the billions of neurons, and we know the space-time outside the world. So there should be a correspondence between outside world, outside geometry, and the functional space in my brain. And then so we need to construct a mathematical transformation by which we can say that, okay, outside geometry is, say, Euclidean or Riemannian, and inside geometry is something, and by that we can understand reality. This is the problem, and Linus and his collaborator Paleonich, they proposed a space called functional space, and around 1985 they published a series of papers to understand the space-time structure in a functional space. And a lot of criticism have come from various neuroscientists and physicists too. But some problems we tackled in 2006 or 2007. I mean, myself with Rodolfo. So those kind of, we are able to overcome those kind of criticism. So one criticism is like this. I take a stone and the stone is falling towards the earth. So take a particular instant. So that instant, the stimulus or light is coming, it is falling on the retina of my eye. Then what happens? There are millions of receptors in the retina. So they will be active. And after that, the ion should be propagating through different channels called axons. And then these axons have different diameters. They have diameters are different. And they are connecting with central nervous systems, which is the ultimate box, which processes all this information. So the issue is that because of the diameters of the axons are different, the conduction speed of the ions will be different. So one particular instant in the outside world, it becomes many instants in central nervous system. So how can you recognize this instant and the object? This is known as problem of simultaneity. And this simultaneity problem was also dealt in specialty of relativity in a different way. So what is the solution for that? It was a stumble block of understanding space-time. The answer is very simple. You know, brain, I mean waking state, you have heard lectures already. Sleep, waking state and REM sleep. Nobody mentioned that this gamma oscillation, 40 Hz oscillations, 30 to 100 Hz oscillations, they are dominating oscillations in both REM sleep, REM sleep and waking state. So how to differentiate? If waking state and dream state are dominated by gamma oscillations, so can you say I am now dreaming or I am really in waking state? So this is like Chinese story. A butterfly, one day he is dreaming that he became human being. Then he is thinking whether human being, he becomes dreaming that he is now butterfly. So these kind of things are happening, and nobody really understands what is the phase transition between waking state and dreaming state. So the issue is, because of the existence of 40 Hz oscillation, which is responsible for the awareness of sleeping and also in waking state, the corresponding time, quanta of time or minimum duration of time is 10 to 15 Hz. It's simple. You divide 1 by the frequency, you get, it varies from 10 to 15 milliseconds. This is called quanta of time. These were discussed by Linus and his group, published many papers in PNS, Neuroscience, etc., etc. So the quanta of time is 10 to 15 milliseconds. On the other hand, the delay in conduction time is exactly 10 to 15 milliseconds. So you have an instrument like brain who is observing outside world, and the instrument has a resolution of 10 to 15 milliseconds. So there is no problem of understanding, because the single instant which is perceived in with a delay of 10 to 15 milliseconds, because its resolution is 10 to 15 milliseconds, so we will see it's one instant. So we have solved this problem of continuity, problem of simultaneity, and then the geometry is called dynamic geometry, and but again a big nail has been put in the coffin by Rodolfo Linus and another famous neuroscientist in USA, Buddhist. They published a paper in 2017 in Science. They studied anatomy of the brain and said no, brain cannot perceive space-time as we understand in physics. So the story is almost at the end. If we cannot define a space-time geometry in the brain, then how do we apply quantum theory? Because quantum theory needs Hilbert space structure, or quantum field theory needs the four-dimensional Minkowskian structure. So we are in a very, very difficult situation, and many people are trying to understand in terms of the quantum theory, quantum field theory, but the situation is very, very bad. So I'm almost at the end. Let me conclude by what is Buddhist perspective. If the technology of the brain scanning were so improved and perfected that we could follow the causal chain of physical or biophysical processes from seeing someone with love, hate, starting from the eye, then through the optic nerve into the brain until its final physical manifestation as the firing of neurons, we would have reached a state beyond which no physical causal connection was present, and yet causality would still be occurring as evidenced by the experience of the love and hate. From a Buddhist point of view, any further causality along with the change would be regarded as coming from the mental processes rather than physical processes. And let me conclude it. Niels Bohr, he once told, he argued that quantum theory should not be applied to living systems. He also argued that classical concepts are inadequate for that purpose. So the strict Copenhagen approach is simply to renounce the applicability of contemporary physical theories, both classical and quantum, to neurobiology. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Roy, to bring up all issues which quantum physicists have been facing to explain consciousness. Such lucid presentation even make me understand how difficult the situation is. Now we'll go to the next speaker. We'll explain consciousness from the Buddhist perspective. When Geshe Tenjin Dancho first attended the lower TCB school, then TCB by Bupi Commerce, he did his Bachelor of Commerce from St. Philomena College, Mysore University, and he joined the Institute of Buddhist Dialectic School where he studied Buddhist philosophy for 16 years and was awarded the Geshe degree from Drepung Lusling Monastery of South India. He had also gone to USA and UK, and then at present he is a teacher in Dharmashala as a coordinator to the foreign colleges and lecturer of Buddhist philosophy and practice. Geshe Tenjin.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. And also I would like to say thank you for having me over here to the Tibet House, Geshe Dojitam Bilwar and Professor C.C. Roy. So without taking much time, I will just start my talk. First, I bow down to a Buddha, to him who sits inside in speech, make him unexcelled as sage and teacher, the victor who will realize the ultimate truth, then taught us dependently related arising. So, in the Buddhist, the philosophy, the different schools, we just give the definition as a general. Luminous and knowing is the standard definition of consciousness in the Buddhism. So in the science, when we talk about the consciousness, they talk about the five consciousness. And in the Buddhism, we talk about the another one called the sixth consciousness, called the mental and it has got like 51 mental factors. Now the three question arises: the consciousness, does it have a beginning? And consciousness, does it have a continuation? And consciousness, does it have an end? Now, if we talk about from the consciousness, does it have a beginning? From the Buddhism perspective, what do we say is it doesn't have a beginning, it's a beginningless. Then the science and the other religion, the science, what do they say is that the mind is a derivative of brain, and yesterday too, some of the speakers, they mentioned that the consciousness arises from the brain. And in some of the other religions, like Hindu, Christian, and the Muslims, Islams, they believe in the Creator and thinking that it's created by God. Now, if we believe that it is a beginning, then who created us? And the Creator, is it a permanent or impermanent? These are the questions that we arise. Then, let's say, if you take example of me, so what are my primary causes and what are my secondary causes? As for the primary causes, what do we, in the Buddhist, what do we say is, it's my previous life consciousness. Then, secondary causes are the 23 chromosomes from the father, 23 chromosomes from the mother, and the perfect womb. In the science, what do they say is, in the early times, the 23 chromosomes from father, 23 chromosomes from the mother, and the perfect womb. Now, these days, the scientists, what do they say is, despite fulfilling all these things, still, why the baby is not conceived? Now, some things that it needs a kind of like extra, some force, but they can't say it's the consciousness. But in the Buddhist, what do we say is, yes, this is the consciousness. When the consciousness conceived in the mother's womb, now the question is, when does it enter in the mother's womb? Now, let's say, if you believe the consciousness arises from the brain, and the brain controls everything, if there's a cut on our hand, and the brain signals, oh yes, there's a cut on your hand, you should cry or you should shout. Now there's another person, let's say Mr. A and Mr. B. Mr. A shouts, but the Mr. B, he just thinks, oh, it's just a normal cut, but he doesn't shout. Why? If it's controlled by the brain, both the person has to shout. Now, in the Buddhism, what do we say is, mind should control over the body. Body shouldn't let control over the mind. If we let body to control over the mind, then we make mountains out of molehill. Then, yeah. So let's say in the war, like especially when your legs got cut, but still you want to kill the enemy. You don't give notice on your leg. And afterwards, oh, I'm feeling pain. Does the brain forget to signal him that your leg is cut? Now over here, the consciousness, does it have a continuation? In the Buddhism and the Hindus, what do we believe is there is a life after death. And death is not an end, it's just a new beginning. And can we recall the past lives? In the Buddhism, we believe that in reincarnation, and there are lots of people who can recall their past lives. But if I don't recall my past lives, it doesn't mean that there is no such things. Then the consciousness is like a guest, and body is like a guest house. Now, all of us, we have a mobile, right? The mobile and its battery. The mobile itself, it's like a body, and the battery, it's like a consciousness. We can take out the battery and put in another one in the other mobile. Right? Then some people, they might think that, oh, it's something to do with the Buddhists and Hindus. Over here, the Dr. I. Stevenson from Kentucky University, if you look in the YouTube or in the Google, you will find that he has done lots of research, despite he's a scientist. And he has encountered with lots of patients who can recall their past lives. And not only in the Buddhists and Hindus, even among the non-believers too. And also who don't believe in the life after death. How is it possible? Now, science, when brain dies, consciousness dies. It's like a painting on the wall. When we destroy the wall, and painting also get destroyed. Right? Then, now they might think, oh, Hindus and the Buddhists, they talk about the same thing. No, it's the same concept. In the Hindu and the Buddhist, Hindu use the term soul, but we use the term consciousness. And also, the Hindu, they consider the soul as independent. We consider it as interdependent. And they consider it as, Hindu consider it as a permanent. We consider it as impermanent. And Hindu talks about the self, and we talk about no self. And they talk about the liberation, and we talk about the enlightenment. And there's a both difference in it. And main difference between the Hindu Tantra and Buddhist Tantra, it's about the emptiness. So, to understand the Buddhist Tantra, we should understand the emptiness. Without understanding the emptiness, what the emptiness is, it's very difficult to understand what the Buddhist Tantra is. Then memories. Let's say, memories in which part of brain, which part of body is stored. The science that talks about, oh, it's stored in the hippocampus. But as for the, let's say, when the human being dies, in Tibet, we used to have a kind of like, we call it sky burial. We feed to the vultures. And the brains are also eaten by the vultures. Hippocampus were eaten by the vultures. And the Hindu, now these days we Buddhists do, we cremate the body. And the hippocampus is totally burned, destroyed. And Islam, Christianity, they bury the body. And hippocampus get decomposed, totally eaten by the scavengers. The person who is buried in the north, let's say in Asia, and the newborn baby who were born in the west, how he can recall his past lives if the memories are restored in the brain? Does it mean that hippocampus went all the way from east to west? And we Buddhists, what we believe is the sixth mental consciousness. The memories are stored in the sixth mental consciousness. Then you might have heard about the headless chicken. And also about a person, 90% of the brain, it's kind of like missing, but still he lives happily, normally. Now comes one can end the suffering. Oh, wait a minute. Yes. So one can end the suffering, but consciousness continues. Now, the Buddha, when he attained enlightenment, he first gave the discourse on the Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering, the truth of origin of suffering, the truth of cessation, and the truth of path. And some of the people, they criticize Buddha. Oh, you just make people unhappy. Why? Because right from the very beginning, you are talking about the suffering. And the Buddha said, yes, there's a solution for the suffering. That's why I said suffering first. Now, it's an innate nature that everybody wants happiness. Nobody wants suffering. Over here, how I should overcome the suffering? By doing prayer or by practicing. For the centuries, we were doing prayers. Still, there's no peace. And from where should this peace come from? From outside, or inside, or by doing only prayers? Now over comes modern psychology thinks affective emotions like anxiety, depression, etc. It's something to do with a chemical imbalance. And it gives the medicines, dopamine and the others. And in the Buddhism says mental problem or mind problem has to be solved by mind only. Now we have a doctor. So the choice, we have choice. Should I take medicine or is there any other kind of solution for it? We are not denying that the medicine doesn't help. Medicine helps. But how long should I take medicine? For my whole life? Now, over here, the science, there are 4 hormones which determines as a human happiness. Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, then oxytocin. As for the Buddhism, while doing a meditation, people think that, oh, just close your eyes and think nothingness, it's a meditation. Right? Now these days, doctors, when we go to the hospital, they advise us to do the meditation, but the main thing is they don't tell us how to do it. There are lots of Buddhist centers, meditation centers. They teach us, think nothingness, focus on the breathing, that's it. How far we should go. Now comes over here, think opposite. When you have anger, meditate on the love and compassion. If you feel jealousy all the time, think about rejoicement. When you have kind of like sense of miser feeling, practice generosity. Now that too, with the help of wisdom, with the logic. Why should I develop compassion and kindness to people who harms me? Otherwise, Buddha said, think about compassion, then it becomes a dogmatic. The Buddha said, dear fellow Sanghas, don't follow me ignorantly, blindly. Like the goldsmith, melt the gold, tear the gold. If it's a pure gold, then accept it. Like the same way, analyze my teaching. If it's helping you, practice it. Otherwise, forget it. So, to understand all these things, we do a debate from Monday to Saturday for 4.5 hours daily. Then His Holiness the Dalai Lama always tells us that you should be a 21st Buddhist practitioner. What does it mean, the 21st Buddhist practitioner? Develop a faith with the help of wisdom. Blind faith is outdated. Now comes over here, by controlling the consciousness, how does it affect the brain? So over here, the EEG, the lots of monks who are meditating, they are invited in the state and try to see how does it affect to the brain one develops when we anger, and after that how it develops changes to the brain, how it brings the changes when trying to meditate on the compassion and all these things. I'll go a little faster. So these are the pictures. The Dr. Richard Davidson, and then with a collaboration with the Stanford University and the Dellek Hospital and the Menzicon, they all do this research. So over here, the modern psychology tells us, take the medicine. Yes, take the medicine. But for how long? Now comes the consciousness. The consciousness can be divided into 3 divisions. Gross level of consciousness, subtle level of consciousness, very subtle level of consciousness. When we talk about the consciousness in the brain, now over here, does the consciousness or the mind body, does it relate? And the previous session, there was some discussion, right? Now over here, as for the gross level of consciousness, the consciousness has to rely on the brain, like smelling, hearing, touching, taste, vision, and all these things. We don't deny that there is no relation at all. There is a relation, but on the very gross level. Then comes the second. The second one, I just kept empty, blank. Why? Because when we go to a deep sleep, right, we have got different types of dreams. Before, let's say, when I was about to fall asleep, I will have a dream. That dream is related with the day activities. Then when it goes to a deep sleep, what happens? Eyes, nose, ears, touching, tongue, physical consciousness, all this consciousness submerged from one to another into mental consciousness. So at that time, when somebody tries to open my eyelids like that, I won't see anything. When someone calls my name, I won't hear anything. When someone will try to bring my best food, still I won't be able to feel anything. When somebody touches my body like this, I won't be able to feel anything. Why? Because it has it has submerged into the mental consciousness. Then about 2 a.m., 3 a.m., then again this whole consciousness goes back to the respective places. Then again, at that time we'll have another dream. So most of the things, the dream, there are some people, like especially the high lamas, they are highly, let's say, like practitioners who can control the dream. But it doesn't mean that I can't do it, that no one can do it. There are some people who do the divination, checking on the dreams. So early morning dream, it's kind of like a little bit important, but dream is a dream. We shouldn't attach to it. But the deep sleep, we won't be able to recall anything. So that's why I have just kept empty. Okay, now comes the clear light state of meditation. This one is kind of like very, very subtle. The people in the, let's say, they are highly practitioners. It doesn't happen only in the monks and nuns, it also happens to the lay people too. Recently in Dharamsala, 2 of the monks, they stayed clear light state of meditation. Clear light state of meditation, it's kind of like clinically they are dead, brain dead. But still, the consciousness, it's in the science, what do they say is whether the person is dead or not, they check it through the ECG. But as for us, in the Buddhism, we talk about outer breath and inner breath. Outer breath and the inner breath, and also when you talk about the wind energy, there are 10 different types of wind energy. Outer breath has ceased, brain is dead. Still, the consciousness, the inner breath is still very much active. Whole body, it's very cold, but over here the chest, it's warm. And when the person dies, their body becomes very stiff, like a wood. But their body, it's like a a live human being. It can be stretched, can do anything. Then their body doesn't decompose. Even at the temperature of like 40 degrees Celsius, 42 like that. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teacher stayed 14 days. And another High Lama in South India stayed for 21 days. Recently, in the month of June this year, another monk, he stayed for 12 days. So it clearly shows the very subtle level of consciousness doesn't have to rely on the brain. The gross level, of course. The subtle level, little bit. But very subtle level, then it doesn't have to depend upon the brain. Let's say, the two truths. So I don't want to put this one in my talk. Why? Because then since yesterday and everyone is talking about the true truths, right? Then I just thought like, it would be helpful to the listeners if I just try to differentiate two truths, a method, let's say conventional truth and the ultimate truth. The conventional truth, a method, and the ultimate truth, like a wisdom. A method helps to understand what the compassion is. It will help to develop compassion. Then, with the ultimate truth, it will help to understand the emptiness. Then, in the method, conventional, it talks about the character, non-violence, and the view, interdependent. The conventional truth is more like without introspection. Ultimate truth, it's like with the introspection. Conventional truth, it's more of the appearance. And the ultimate truth, it's more of like reality. By practicing these two, conventional truth helps us to reduce one's selfish attitude. And with the ultimate truth, it will help to reduce one's self-centered grasping. In the end, healthy body comes from healthy mind. And healthy mind comes from healthy body. So both are interrelated, right? His Holiness always talks about not only the hygiene of body, hygiene of mind is equally important. We gives like importance on the appearance, but not the inner one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deshi, the Indian Dhamma show.
Can I show one video clip? It's just a minute.
It will take
1 minute.
Oh my God, headless chicken was... Oh my God, headless chicken walking around steadily. This is a live octopus cuisine, and this is a live snake meat made in China. But be prepared for what you're going to see here. Well, have you ever seen a headless chicken walking around energetically? The shocking video has gone viral on the internet. The incredible chicken whose head has been cut off was still able to balance on a perch and move as steadily as any chickens with heads. It has attracted lots of attention from local residents. Some people were so amazed and said that seeing this animal is a miracle and even yelled out. There was even a person trying to provoke the chicken and was aware of it and dodged. As for why this chicken can still walk around, Well, some people infer that it might be because the axe missed the jugular vein and left most of the brainstem intact, and the blood clot stopped the chicken from dying of blood loss. Actually, this is not the first sighting of a headless chicken in the world. There used to be a famous headless chicken called Mike from the US during 1945 and lived for 18 months after his head had been cut off. Mike was thought by many as a hoax. However, it has been proved that Mike was indeed a real headless chicken.
So grave is not necessary for consciousness. Clear message. Marisha Jijina is a clinical psychologist trained at the IBHAS, Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences, New Delhi. She has been working at the MS University of Baroda since 2013 as assistant professor of psychology and is currently also pursuing her doctorate degree on the topic of equanimity, which all of us need, and its psychological health concomitants. She is trained hypnotherapist and is currently the assistant director of the postgraduate diploma in clinical and applied hypnosis being offered at the Department of Psychology, MS University, Baroda. Parisha.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Geshila Dorji Nandul and Professor Roy for giving me this opportunity. And my topic for today is consciousness in Western psychology. So I have tried to sort of organize my presentation as to first descriptive question, how does Western psychology look at consciousness? Then how does it explain consciousness? And most importantly, why do we need consciousness? The functional question. And since I'm a psychologist, I would like to talk about from how do we apply this in mental health. So we do counseling almost on a daily basis. And how are all these concepts used when we do psychotherapy or hypnosis or counseling? Okay. So first we come to what are the key features or how does Western psychology look at consciousness? As Dr. Thomas also mentioned before, most important is it is a state of awareness or what we call as meta-mentality. Now I would just like to give a small case study. Recently I had a student who was around 19 or 20 years old and she had become suicidal. So she kept having these thoughts that I want to die. And interestingly, there were no significant stressors in her life. So when I was talking to her, over the period of time I realized that all her statements were a little bit extreme. So for example, everybody always hurts me, or I hurt everybody all the time. My mother always loves my brother more. So when I just pointed out this very simple fact, I told her, I just repeated like a mirror. I just reflected few of her statements back to her and I told her, are you aware that most of your statements are always in the extreme? Right? So for example, my mother always loves my brother more. I said, you think back, now you're 20 years old. Has since the past 20 years, is it that every single time your mother has favored your brother? So she was like, no. Then I was like, is it every single time that you have hurt your friends? So she was like, no. So simply when people become aware of such small things, then her depression reduced, suicidality went down. So you can see that it's such a small thing, but very, very important, especially when we do counseling. So for example, Western psychology says that if I have a desire for a cup of coffee, it would mean that I am conscious that I have a desire or I am aware that I want coffee. Okay. Second thing that psychology states is that consciousness is basically qualitative also. So we call it qualia. So for example, if I am drinking wine, now I am conscious I am drinking wine because wine has a particular taste. It feels, when I am drinking wine, I taste it, I am sensing it. Okay. The third thing is phenomenal states. We also call it self-perspectival structure. Now, this is very important phenomenologically. So, when we do counseling, we have a very famous psychologist called Carl Rogers, and his entire therapy is called phenomenological counseling. Now, he says that the first thing when you want to counsel somebody or give advice to somebody is that you must literally get behind the eyes of that person and see the world how they look at the world. So, for example, I have to put myself in their shoes, so empathize with them, right? So over here also, when we talk of consciousness, it is how people look at the world. It is not just how we look at the world, but also how everybody else looks at the world. And Thomas Nagel in the 70s, he spoke about something called what it is like state. So he said a bat is also a conscious being because there is something to being a bat. So how you, so for example, a bat has equalatory systems, etc. So what he means to say is that a conscious being is conscious because there is something to be in that state. Then we talk about access consciousness. Now this is very important. I would like to connect this with conversion disorders. So in psychiatry we have a whole group of disorders called conversion disorders. Conversion disorders is when there is extreme emotional trauma, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and the person sort of represses it, and the trauma comes out on the body. So for example, my limb could be paralyzed, but there is no physical problem, right? But there is a psychological issue, psychological trauma. So here, when information is blocked from your conscious awareness, or when you are not consciously aware of it, you repress it, it can be extremely harmful for your body. So those who are neuroscientists, like even at the hospital where I was trained, we had an entire department of psychology aligned with the neuropsychiatry department, because in India there is a very high incidence rate of conversion disorders. So many people come to the neurologist, but they may present as having seizures, but actually there are pseudo seizures. So I'll just give one case study over here. So we had one client who was around 18 to 20 years old, and she belonged to an extremely poor family, and her mother used to sort of she used to sort of let other men in the locality use her daughter in the night for a certain amount of money. Now this young girl of 18-19 years old, she presented with multiple paralysis of her hands, of her limbs, and physiologically there was nothing wrong with her. And she didn't even tell us all these things, we came to know much later. So what I'm trying to say is that when information is blocked from your conscious awareness, when you repress it, it can be very harmful. It does come out on the body. Then Western psychology also says that when we talk of consciousness studies, we need first person data and third person data. So first person data would be highly trained introspection, highly trained observation. And third person data also. Now why do we need third person data? Now there's a rule we follow when we do counseling, that when the client comes to us, we always try, if possible, to get third person data. So for example, from the family member, or from the spouse, or from the friend. Now why do we do this? We do this because many times most of us are not aware of our behavior or our problems. So when we get third person data, we get very significant, important clues which help us. So even in consciousness studies, Western psychology says that also use third person data, not just first person introspection or observation. Okay. Then Western psychology says that consciousness, for example, also has a feature of unity. So now I am conscious that I am in this room, but at the same time I am conscious that I am in India Habitat Center, I am in Delhi, etc. etc. So it is not something, it's unified. And then, like we have spoken yesterday also, consciousness does include an element of intentionality. From yesterday's speakers have been talking about it. And then consciousness is dynamic. So that's why we use the term stream of consciousness. So it is not something static, it's very, very dynamic. Okay. Now we come to the question, the functional aspect of consciousness. Why do we need consciousness? So first is flexible control. So for example, all those processes which are automatic, fixed, predetermined, they are usually very rigid. Right? But when we have more conscious awareness, we become more flexible, we become more adaptive, it is more effortful, it is more slow. Right? And this is very important when we are dealing with new situations or we are learning something new. So even in mental health, we always try for something called as cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility is you look at the larger scheme of things, you look at the larger picture, and that is possible when your response is a more aware response, a more slower response, not something very automatic. So for example, if my boss yells at me and I constantly think that, oh, he's so horrible, etc., etc., a more conscious response would be to look at why is he yelling at me, can I put myself in my boss's shoes, etc. So you see what is happening is that I am becoming more flexible cognitively. Then what is important, we need consciousness for social coordination. Because of consciousness, we are more aware. When we are more aware, we are more adaptive. Right? We can interact better, we can communicate in much more advanced ways. Then we have, when we talk of consciousness, it is also an integrated representation of interconnections, what Buddhism also talks about. And then informational access. So what I spoke about, for example, conversion disorders. Right? So making information conscious typically widens sphere of its influence and the range of ways in which it can be used to adaptively guide or shape both our inner and outer behavior. So when we, for example, when we do cognitive behavior therapy, we try to make people aware of what are their cognitive distortions. So for example, this girl, what I spoke about earlier, she had this cognitive distortion of having black and white thinking or all or none thinking. So my mother never loves me. So we don't think in shades of grey. We always think in extremes. Right? So when we are conscious, when we are more aware, we can definitely better shape our inner and outer behavior. And then consciousness gives us freedom of will. So for example, we can choose better, we can act more freely, much more better. And this is one of my favorite psychologists, he is Carl Rogers, and when he says that when we experience the other person as a person in his or her own right, only then there is a meeting at a depth that dissolves the pain of aloneness in both client and therapist. So basically what he is talking about is empathy, which is very much required in today's world, and empathy is possible only with awareness. You cannot have empathy without awareness. Okay. And now we come to some theories of consciousness, what Dr. Thomas has also just shown us. So you have higher order theories, reflexive theories, and some cognitive theories. Now these are just few of the theories. Now this contradicts to what Geshe-la has just told us. So these higher order theories tell us that consciousness is located mainly in the brain. So for example, having a conscious desire for chocolate involves being in two mental states. One must have both a desire for chocolate and at the same time a higher order state that one is now having such a desire. So here again this theory is coming back to awareness. Then reflexive theories is an extension of this theory. So it differs a little bit. It says that they locate the aspect of self-awareness directly within the conscious state rather than as a distinct meta state directed at it. And then we have some cognitive theories. So now here in 2000, Dehaene is saying that consciousness in both access and phenomenal sense occurs when the content enters the primary sensory area as well as many other areas including frontal and parietal areas associated with attention. Okay. Now we come to how do we apply it in mental health. Now this is something what I want to just talk about because WHO estimates that in the next 12 years, 2030, India is going to have depression as the second largest killer of youth between the age of 18 to 40, and we are seeing it on a daily basis. I come from a small town, Baroda, and even there, if you read the newspaper, every second day you read that so and so has committed suicide, and so many sometimes tribal reasons also, right? So now let's see. So basically, in India currently, also across the world, CBT is being used a lot. CBT is cognitive behavior therapy, and it works on this principle that our thoughts affect our emotions, and our emotions affect our behavior, and all this is interlinked with how we feel, physiology. Right? So simple example, most students come to us saying that I'm afraid of failing in the exam. Now when I think like that, I'm going to feel afraid, I'm going to feel anxious. My behavior would normally be, I will avoid studying, sometimes our students get into drugs, alcoholism, all these things also. Right? So now what we do is, we use these 3 C's, that is catch, check and change. So now catch is related to consciousness. Here what we do is identify the thought that came before the emotion. So nowadays you have apps on your phone also. So if you can just go to Google Apps or Play Store, you will find that there are apps which you can download freely, and they will make you aware of which thoughts are coming to your mind. So even Nimhans in Bangalore, they have recently developed an app called Push D. D stands for depression, so push depression away. And it's freely available, and you can download it, and you just need to enter your thoughts. And once you enter those thoughts, you become aware of what is going on in your mind, right? And once people become aware of their thoughts, then we help them with further awareness. And what is that further awareness? Is it rational? Is it irrational? We don't force it upon them, they have to decide. And if they decide that these thoughts are irrational, then consciously they choose to modify these thoughts. And then we see a change. So for example, anxiety, depression, everything goes down. Now, I would just like to give one case study over here. We had a student who got selected into BITS Pilani, which is a very prestigious college. But in the first year itself, he got into severe depression and he came back to Baroda. Now the problem was that he had all of these cognitive distortions. So for example, thinking that he was a little overweight, so all the time thinking that no girl will like me, and magnification. Magnification is when you make a mountain out of a small thing. So for example, I've failed in this internship, now my entire course is gone, etc., etc. Right? So what we did was simple again. Because he was very tech savvy, we told him to download the app, become aware of your thoughts, and once he became aware of his thoughts, he realized that his thinking is again towards the extreme, blowing up things out of proportion, and that simply brings the depression down, right? And now we come to Freudian therapy. Now Freud has spoken a lot about consciousness, but very differently from what Buddhism says. So he says that right now all of us are in the conscious state. Suppose Freud would ask us to remember what you had for breakfast. That he calls as pre-conscious, so what you can remember easily, and unconscious. Now unconscious is where all your traumatic, highly traumatic material, what you can't face in your real life, goes. So for example, many a times we had this one case where there was a 9-year-old boy and his parents were killed in front of him due to some reason, and he just simply couldn't remember that his parents were killed right in front of him, even though it happened right in front of him. Now, where does that information go? So according to Freud, it would go into the unconscious. So as a therapist, Freud said that what our job is to simply bring all those conflicts back into the conscious awareness, and once we do that, person gets insight. So insight and awareness are very highly correlated. The more you are aware, the more insight you have, and once you have insight, automatically your problems go down. So what we do in hypnosis is, we use it a lot in Baroda, and the rationale for hypnosis is that we simply give suggestions. So if we have a student who is scared of giving exams, we would give him or her suggestions that you will give your exams in a proper way, etc., etc. So in hypnosis what happens is, when we relax the person completely, we use techniques like breath watching, etc. And then in this relaxed state, we give them suggestions. Now what we believe is that when we are giving suggestions in a relaxed state, the suggestions are directly entering the unconscious mind. And when they directly enter the unconscious mind, they are more likely to be followed. Right? So thank you. I hope I could just give a glimpse of how we are using these concepts indirectly in mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Parisha, for an excellent presentation. Actually, thank you to all the speakers for their excellent presentation. And really, it was a very educative session. But we unfortunately do not have time for interaction. You can interact with the speaker during lunchtime. But I have one thing to tell you, that don't leave this hall taking this idea that brain is not necessary. The reason I am telling, chicken head is called headless chicken can only stand and dance. There is millions of years of evolution of the brain, so that we have got human brain who can think quantum mechanics, who can think Buddhism, who can become Buddha. The chicken head can never become a Buddha. Please, so don't go leave this hall with this impression that brainless chicken we are all. It is not.
Thank you to all the speakers and our chairperson. May I now request Professor Ravindra Nagendra to honor our speakers with a Buddha statue and Tibetan scarf. Professor A.K. Mukhopadhyay. Dr. Joseph Ivan. Venerable Deshitezi Thamje. Thank you. We'll now break for lunch and we'll resume.